There are generals who followed orders, and there are generals who wrote the orders that changed warfare forever. Heinz Guderian was the second kind. He looked at the tank, a weapon that most military thinkers in the 1930s considered a support tool for infantry, and he saw something completely different. He saw speed. He saw mass. He saw the future of war. And then he built that future from scratch, put it on tracks, and drove it across Europe faster than anyone thought possible. But Guderian was not just a military visionary. He was also one of the most difficult, most argumentative, most insubordinate senior commanders in the entire German military. He fought with his superiors constantly. He ignored orders he disagreed with. He was fired twice, once by Hitler, once by his own army group commander. He screamed at generals who outranked him. He told Hitler to his face that his decisions were catastrophically wrong, and yet he kept coming back. Because Germany needed him, because nobody else could do what he did, and because the man who invented Blitzkrieg was too valuable to leave on the shelf, even when he was making everyone around him furious. This is the story of Heinz Guderian, the father of armored warfare, the man who conquered France in 6 weeks and drove to the gates of Moscow, and the man who spent as much energy fighting his own side as he did fighting the enemy. Heinz Wilhelm Guderian was born on June 17, 1888, in Kulm, a town in what was then the German Empire and is now Poland. He came from a military family. His father was an officer, and the expectation from childhood was that Heinz would follow. He entered the military academy, graduated, was commissioned as an officer in 1908, and served in World War I as a signals and staff officer. That experience in signals, in communications, in the movement of information across a battlefield, would shape everything he did afterward. Guderian understood before almost anyone else that the key to modern warfare was not firepower alone. It was coordination. It was the ability to move information as fast as you moved men and machines. An army that knew what was happening could react. An army that didn't was already losing. After World War I, the German army was restricted to 100,000 men by the Treaty of Versailles. Tanks were prohibited entirely. But Guderian used the years of restriction to think. He read everything. British theorists like Liddell Hart and J.F.C. Fuller, who were developing ideas about mechanized warfare. He studied the role of the tank in the final stages of World War I. He thought about what a future war would look like if armor, infantry, artillery, and air support were properly coordinated and properly commanded. And he started writing. His ideas were radical for the time. Most military thinking in the 1920s and early 1930s still saw the tank as a tool to support infantry, something that moved at the pace of walking men, cleared obstacles, provided direct fire support. Guderian said that was completely wrong. Tanks should be concentrated, not dispersed. They should move at the speed of tanks, not the speed of infantry. They should penetrate enemy lines and drive deep, not pause, not consolidate, not wait for the infantry to catch up, but keep moving, driving into the enemy's rear, destroying headquarters and supply lines and communications, creating chaos faster than the enemy could respond. He called it not Blitzkrieg. That term was actually invented by journalists, but he called for schnelle Truppen, fast troops. The concept was speed as a weapon. Move faster than the enemy can think. Get inside their decision cycle. Make decisions they're still reacting to obsolete before the reaction arrives. When Hitler came to power and Germany began secretly rearming, Guderian finally had the resources to test his ideas. He was given command of Germany's new Panzer forces, and he threw himself into the work with total obsession. He designed training programs. He worked on the development of new tank models. He established the tactical and operational doctrines that would govern how German armor fought. He argued constantly, with the army's traditional leadership, with officers who thought his ideas were too radical, with anyone who suggested that tanks should be spread out and subordinated to infantry divisions. He won most of those arguments. And in 1937, he published his landmark book, Achtung Panzer, which laid out his theories in full and became required reading for armor officers around the world, including, eventually, his enemies. In 1939, the invasion of Poland gave Guderian his first real test at operational scale. His 19th Panzer Corps drove through Polish defenses with a speed that stunned observers on both sides. He was everywhere, forward, at the front, in personal contact with his lead units, making decisions on the spot rather than waiting for reports to travel up and down the chain of command. His command style was as radical as his tactical doctrine. He led from the front. He used radio to control his units in real time. He was not a general who sat in a headquarters and moved pieces on a map. He was a general who drove to where the fighting was and commanded from there. Poland fell in 5 weeks. But Poland was a rehearsal. France in 1940 was where Guderian's ideas proved themselves completely. His Panzer Corps was the tip of the spear in the Ardennes breakthrough, the operation conceived by Manstein that Guderian executed. While the world watched German forces advance into Belgium, Guderian drove his armor through the Ardennes forest, the terrain that everyone said was impassable for tanks, and came out the other side moving at full speed toward the English Channel. What happened in those weeks in May 1940 was unprecedented in military history. Guderian's corps covered distances in days that military planners had assumed would take weeks. His tanks drove so fast that his own army group commander ordered him to stop, to wait for infantry to catch up, to consolidate his gains, to not expose his flanks to counterattack. Guderian argued. He kept moving. He was briefly relieved of command in the middle of the operation. His superior, General von Kleist, relieved him after a furious argument over the phone. Guderian threatened to resign. A compromise was reached. He kept advancing under the fiction of a reconnaissance in force rather than a full advance. He reached the English Channel. He cut off the British and French armies to the north. Over 300,000 Allied soldiers were trapped at Dunkirk. France fell in 6 weeks, and Guderian was the man whose armor had made it possible. He was promoted to Colonel General. He was decorated. He was celebrated as one of the architects of Germany's most stunning military victory. And he was already looking at the next campaign, Operation Barbarossa in 1941. The invasion of the Soviet Union gave Guderian command of Panzer Group II, one of the main armored formations driving into Soviet territory. In the first weeks, the advance was extraordinary. His forces covered hundreds of kilometers. They encircled entire Soviet armies in a series of massive encirclements, Minsk, Smolensk, Kiev, that captured hundreds of thousands of prisoners and destroyed enormous quantities of Soviet equipment. But the Soviet Union was not France. The distances were incomprehensible. The enemy kept coming no matter how many were killed or captured. The roads were terrible, or rather, the roads were barely roads at all. Dirt tracks that turned to deep mud in rain and froze into impassable obstacles in winter. And Hitler's decisions were becoming increasingly problematic. The biggest crisis came in August 1941. Guderian's Panzer Group was driving toward Moscow. The Soviet capital was within striking distance. Guderian believed, and most of his fellow commanders agreed, that driving on Moscow was the correct strategic objective. Capturing the Soviet capital would destroy the Soviet communications network, threaten Stalin's government, and potentially end the war in the east. Hitler disagreed. He ordered Guderian's forces south, away from Moscow, into Ukraine, to support the encirclement of Soviet forces around Kiev. Guderian was furious. He flew to Hitler's headquarters personally to argue against the decision. He told Hitler it was the wrong move. Hitler listened, and then told him to follow his orders. The Kiev encirclement was a spectacular tactical success, one of the largest encirclements in military history, capturing over 600,000 Soviet soldiers. But it consumed weeks that could not be recovered. When the drive on Moscow finally resumed in Operation Typhoon in late September 1941, it was already autumn. And then winter came. By December 1941, the German advance had stalled outside Moscow. The army was exhausted, frozen, running out of supplies. The Soviets counterattacked with fresh forces, and Hitler issued his stand-fast order: no retreats, hold every position, die where you stand. Guderian refused. He ordered tactical withdrawals to save his men from being destroyed in place. He pulled units back to more defensible positions. He did exactly what Hoppner had done, made the militarily correct decision in defiance of Hitler's direct order. On December 26, 1941, Guderian was relieved of command. Hitler fired him personally. He was sent home, removed from command, placed on the inactive list. For over a year, one of Germany's best commanders sat at home while the war continued without him. He came back in 1943. The disaster at Stalingrad had destroyed the myth of German invincibility on the Eastern Front, and Hitler needed competent commanders more than he needed obedient ones. Guderian was appointed Inspector General of Armored Troops, a new position that gave him authority over the development and deployment of Germany's tank forces. He used it to push through the development of the Panther and Tiger tanks, to reorganize armored training, to try to rebuild the Panzer force that had been bled white on the Eastern Front. And he fought, constantly, with everyone. He argued with Albert Speer over production priorities. He argued with other generals over the deployment of armor. He argued with Hitler over strategy at every conference he attended. There are accounts of Guderian in Hitler's map conferences raising his voice, pointing his finger, telling the Führer directly and repeatedly that specific decisions were wrong and would lead to disaster. Most of those predictions were correct. Most of them were ignored. After the July 20th plot in 1944, Hitler appointed Guderian as Chief of the Army General Staff, the senior operational position in the German army. It was an almost incomprehensible decision given their history of conflict. But the men Hitler trusted were dead or discredited, and Guderian was still there, still competent, still capable of doing the job. He lasted 8 months. 8 months of daily arguments with Hitler. 8 months of watching decisions being made that he knew were catastrophically wrong and being unable to stop them. 8 months of trying to manage an army that was disintegrating on multiple fronts simultaneously. In March 1945, Hitler finally relieved him again, the second firing. Officially, it was for health reasons. Really, it was because Guderian had argued once too often, pushed back once too many times, made it impossible for Hitler to conduct his fantasy war in peace. Guderian spent the last weeks of the war in a sanatorium in Bavaria. He surrendered to American forces in May 1945. After the war, he was held for questioning, but never tried at Nuremberg. The Americans, and later the West Germans, found his expertise useful. He advised on the structure of the new Bundeswehr as West Germany rearmed for the Cold War. He wrote his memoirs, Panzer Leader, which became one of the most widely read military memoirs of the 20th century and remains in print today. He died in 1954 at the age of 65. He had outlived the regime he served, the army he built, and most of the men he had fought alongside and argued with for 20 years. The debate about Guderian's legacy is complicated by the same questions that complicate almost every senior German commander from that war. He built the military instrument that conquered Poland, France, and drove deep into the Soviet Union, campaigns that caused the deaths of tens of millions of people. He served the Nazi regime loyally through its years of greatest success. He was present at, and sometimes involved in, decisions that affected the lives and deaths of millions of civilians and prisoners of war. At the same time, he never joined the Nazi Party. He argued against decisions he believed were wrong, even when arguing was dangerous. He was fired twice for insubordination, not for cowardice, not for incompetence, but for being unwilling to follow orders he believed would get his men killed for nothing. He was a military genius in service of a criminal state. He was a man of genuine professional integrity, operating within a system that had none. He was both of those things simultaneously, and the tension between them is what makes his story genuinely worth examining. Heinz Guderian changed warfare. The way armies fight with armor today, the concentration of tanks, the deep penetration, the combined arms coordination, the command from the front, traces directly back to ideas he developed in the 1930s and proved on the battlefields of Europe. His enemies studied him, his successors built on his work, and long after the Third Reich he served has been relegated to the ash heap of history. The military doctrine he created lives on. That is the legacy of Heinz Guderian, the father of armored warfare, the general who conquered France in 6 weeks, the man who fought Hitler as hard as he fought the enemy, and one of the most important and most controversial military figures of the 20th century. Thank you for watching. If this video gave you something to think about, hit the like button. It helps this channel reach more people, and for stories this deep that genuinely matters. Subscribe because we put out new videos every single week, and everyone goes this deep. Drop a name in the comments if there is someone from this era you want us to cover next. We read every single one. See you in the next video.